So we'll start by setting our motivation. So we try to think that the purpose of the course is to understand more and more deeply the wisdom that the Buddha taught about the realizations that are necessary to bring an ordinary sentient being like ourselves to enlightenment. And we think that the benefit of achieving enlightenment is the ability to perfectly benefit sentient beings. So we try to develop those minds of confidence in the wisdom of the Buddha, and the aspiration of bodhicitta, wanting to achieve the full result of the path for the benefit of all sentient beings. I try to develop that motivation for listening and participating. All right. So good evening. We'll go ahead and get started. Does anyone have a question from last week that they didn't get a chance to ask, or something that's come up in their minds? Nope. Okay. So we're in the section in Lamrim Year, where we're thinking about properly relating to the spiritual guide, one's root guru. And we are particularly within that, still in the section where Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe are explaining to us the shortcomings, the disadvantages, the repercussions of failing to relate constructively, positively toward the spiritual guide. So out of their kindness, really helping us to go into that kind of relationship or deepen that kind of relationship with a full understanding of the pitfalls of going about it improperly. So it's not the most uplifting of sections, but as we've said, we can't, not all meditations, not all topics are ones that naturally are going to uplift the mind. Some of them are cautionary. Some of them are helping us to develop a wisdom fear of staying on the right path. Just like when we learn to drive a car, part of what will get us excited about that is all of the cool things that we get to do once we are really good at it, but also we will learn about, not speeding, not drinking and driving. Um, and those are all things that are within our control. Those are all things that the people who've come before us, who are really good at that body of knowledge, have learned that people who are new to that body of knowledge need to really be able to think about deeply, so that they can just take control of their own actions, their own mind, and engage with that in the most constructive way. So if we don't speed, if we don't drink and drive, if we learn to be um, aware of what's happening around us, then the process is easy. Then the process isn't, it's not like we're constantly afraid. Am I intoxicated when we know that we're not intoxicated? Am I speeding when we know that we're not speeding? Um, so it isn't that we are meant to kind of have a heavy, negative, fearful mind that just sort of pervades our practice. That's certainly not the intent. The intent is to give us kind of the rules of the road with respect to this relationship, and then internalize those so that they just become second nature. Uh, and then it's not an issue. Then we just are naturally relating correctly, and we don't have to think about it again. It's not it's something to become familiar with and to internalize, and then it just is a natural part of how we relate. So just want to, because practice is meant to be joyful. Practice is meant to um, to bring us closer and closer to enlightenment, to make the mind lighter, more joyful. And so these cautionary topics, although, they are important, but we have to distinguish between a wisdom fear and a neurotic fear, which we've mentioned before, like in the topics on death and so on, where we develop concern that motivates constructive action, and then the constructive action takes care of the concern. And it's not that we're just living with the fear motivates the right kind of action, and then that eliminates the fear. That's sort of the intent of these cautionary topics. That said, we'll dive back into some of the kind of heavy things that are here. So we're on day 26, and the quote for day 26 is, no matter how much we practice Tantra, if we have criticized our master from the heart, we won't achieve any realizations in this life. So in a way this gets back to the question that Aaron asked last week, and that we addressed this a little bit before, where Aaron asked, could we kind of easily or accidentally make a really impactful error in relation to the guru? And what Lama Zopa in this on day 26, he emphasizes that we need to understand this as in relation to the part of it that says from the heart. criticized our master from the heart. So he goes on to clarify that that's not an easy thing to do, that isn't something, that's not a passing thought that arises in the mind due to, we talked before about when, when something is going late, a teaching is going late, and we're like, oh, my dog is at home. Can you please wrap this up? I have to go. And then we're like, oh, I shouldn't have had that thought. I shouldn't have tried to rush my teacher through a teaching because I have this thing. But we've all done that. And if you haven't done that, you will. You'll be thinking about your kids or your dog or something that has to happen, and you'll be really worried that you're gonna miss something, and you'll have this thought, and then you'll be like, "Ooh, maybe that wasn't so good," and fair enough. We should, as we said, we need to relate to that. Um, we need to label that as something um, that wasn't super positive. But this idea of criticizing uh, our master, so here, master, because this quote, this day, is particularly about Vajrayana. So this is talking not necessarily about our root guru. Our root guru could be this person, but this is talking about someone who is practicing Vajrayana. And so this is talking about one's Vajra master, which might, again, could be one's root guru, or it could be that a person has had a sort of sutra relationship with one's root guru, and then one becomes ready or interested to practice Tantra, and then takes initiation and now has a Vajra master, which could be in addition to one's root guru. So this idea of criticizing this person from the heart, he says, sometimes a critical thought just comes and goes, but here from the heart means something serious. If we are careless in our relationships with our gurus, but on the other hand, do hundreds of thousands of prostrations, nothing will happen with our mind. So careless, means kind of that it's ongoing, that it's kind of stable, and that there's no real effort being put into trying to have a really constructive, beneficial, appropriate relationship. It just kind of means, again, like we've said before, taking that person for granted, just kind of thinking of them as a source of information, just like your friend, that kind of knows more than you do, and be like, yeah, they have this good quality, but these other things aren't I don't like about them, and maybe you gossip about that to people, and just kind of treating it like you would someone that who has some bits of information that are helpful, but also has all kinds of problems that you're going to sort of discuss behind their back. And so it's a really kind of, it's not, like he says, it's not just a passing thought that is coming because of some particular momentary thing. It's this sort of ongoing, really more deep-seated way of relating to someone. But still really important to understand, because this has come up, in the course, in this topic before. We've discussed how Lama Zopa is really trying to hit home the fact that it isn't only that, that if we think that we can master bodies of knowledge independent of our relationship with the person who's responsible for teaching us those bodies of knowledge, and that it's just up to us. And if we just do the reading, we go through the motions of, but we don't have that constructive beneficial relationship, then that disconnect will prevent those practices from having any real impact. So we have to we have to have both sides of that together, working together, in order to make that productive. That there are no realizations apart from this constructive relationship with the person who we're relying on to give us what we need to engage in those realizations. That we can't just force it through ritual or through our own practice, if simultaneously we're being disparaging and we're being thoughtless and careless and taking that person for granted, and not doing the constructive things that we need to do that really prepare the mind for realization. But then, of course, as we saw with the last topic, he still joins that with a more hopeful aspect where he says, if we confess and purify, it changes the situation. The whole point is that it is different if we change our attitude, confess our mistake, and attempt not to make the mistake again in the future. So again, that's why it comes down to from the heart, like having this stable, inappropriate way of relating that we're just not interested in looking at. We think it's fine. We don't, we've just decided that we don't really need that person. Yeah, they're kind of helpful sometimes, but I can kind of take it or leave it. And if that's the really, really stable way that we're choosing to relate, then these issues are going to crop up. But we can always adjust. We can always begin to heal and fix that wrong way of relating. Any thoughts or questions so far? Yes, Aaron.
So is it the case then that the actual harm is done when one has forms of type of hate towards the crew, rather than, like, let's say, accidentally doing something? It's kind of like this feeling towards them that's the key.
So, to say that, because I would say everything that we do, it's hard to do something accidentally. You can, you can do things with a more or less intense motivation, so certainly, coming, so I think there's a variety of, because we have to acknowledge too that earlier Lama Zopa, or Lama Yeshe, in one of the, it was pointed out that small mistakes are still mistakes, small errors are still relevant. So a person can do things, so like, I mean, when you say accidentally, that could, like, one way of thinking about accidentally might be like, oh, I never really thought about that I should really try to hear everything that my guru says as advice and like put that advice into practice. Maybe I kind of thought that um, if I liked the advice, then I would follow the advice. And if I didn't like the advice, then I was kind of free to discard it. Um, or not kind of seeing like a general teaching as also advice, kind of like thinking, oh, they have to say, I am advising you to do this, rather than kind of like, well, if my teacher is teaching about this, then that's what they're advising me to do. That's what they think is important. So, I should just, if that's what they've just like, they've thought about, what should I teach on? And how should I teach it? Um, and if they say, well, visualize it like this, or it's this, or try to have this feeling, or this is kind of a sign of success with this, and we just sort of don't pay much attention. Those, I mean, that you could, in a way, say that that's not intentional, improperly relating. So I would say it's definitely true that coming to, you use the word hate, to coming, if we feel, which would, of course, that would generally not be in sort of ongoing relationship with the teacher. That would generally be that they did something, and now we've ended, from our side, we feel like that was impermissible, and now we've given them up, and now we harbor really intense, because if you really hated someone, you wouldn't go to their teachings, you wouldn't ask them questions. But that's still something that, of course, people have to deal with. People historically and contemporaneously, um, get into situations where that does happen, where it was going well and then it stopped going well. And now what do I do with my mind? That's certainly, hopefully, something that we don't have to deal with, but people have had to deal with that. So I would say that's the most intense mistake, is actually feeling a sense of despising someone that you used to take as the embodiment of enlightenment for you. Um, so guarding the mind against allowing that to happen is, I think, the most critically important thing. Um, but it's still, it's a spectrum. And that is the extreme, I would say. Of course, I mean, you could go further than that by actually acting on, by like trying to interfere with that person's life, actually trying to physically cause harm. That would take that, because that would take a mental karma and turn it into a physical karma, and that would probably make it more intense, because now you're adding doors of action to, you've turned something, you've made something physical and mental and probably verbal. You're using like all of your body and mind in service of that delusion, which is certainly worse. Um, but yeah, I mean, we need to also, but I mean, that's sort of why it's so important to study this topic, so that we know, how to train the mind before we get into a situation like that, or so that we understand what kinds of thoughts and actions are really beneficial, and that we really should try to emphasize as much as possible, again, so that that becomes our baseline, so that that becomes something that we've internalized, and we just, you know, when we know that we're going to see the guru, we think about bringing them some flowers, we think about bringing them some tea, we think about offering them a meal, and we think about putting their advice into practice. We think about training to see them as enlightened. You know, we just kind of, and then that just naturally is what arises in the mind over time, and we don't have to continue to think about it because it's just how we relate. Was there something specific that you had a concern about, or in asking that, or?
Yes, because I was thinking like, what if we formed a connection with someone, but we don't know or we forget who they are? And I was wondering, like, would that count as a harm in itself, or a wrong way of moving towards the goal?
Do you mean like in another lifetime, or like what do you mean by forgetting?
This time, like this lifetime? Because like I've heard like teachings on like, you know, podcasts and things like that. Could that have caused that type? Could that be a type of connection?
Um, well, I mean, I think we have to be kind of practical about how seriously, you know, I mean, Lama Zopa would say, if you take vows from someone, then they become your teacher, you know, and so vows and initiations are the two things that energetically kind of create that relationship. Beyond that, you kind of have to have the mindset of regarding them that way. Um, so we have to be careful about vows and initiations, because that can be just kind of a random thing that, you know, like, oh, this is happening, I'm just going to go do that. Um, so, you know, we have to be careful about that. Other than that, though, just because someone has said something that we found helpful, doesn't mean that has created that relationship. We can certainly, you know, respect that person and, you know, be grateful that we were benefited. But we have to kind of go into it thinking, you know, that I'm choosing to regard that person that way, as a guru, as a teacher. Yes, Kodo.
So I feel really comfortable with Geshe-la. I feel really like grounded and very sweetly open and all those really good feelings. So when he comes back, that's like in 5 months or whenever he comes back, how do I or anybody who would like to approach him to begin kind of checking each other out of this guru disciple or teacher disciple relating?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's a very personal process. I mean, of course, historically speaking, they'll say to check the teacher for 3 years, you know, before asking them to become your teacher. So, you know, that is, you know, how literally we take that's up to us. I think it's an indication that we don't ever want to rush into that relationship. But, you know, so I would say that generally speaking, when you're investigating a teacher, you kind of ask their students what their experiences with like their longer term, like people that have known that person for as long as you can find, around 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever is possible. You want to talk to people that have known that person for as long as you can, because it's easy to act a certain way for a year, but difficult to act in a stable way for 20 years. And so if someone has known someone for 20 years and they've said, oh yeah, I've only ever seen this kind of thing, or 90% of the time I've seen it be like this, that's a really good indication. And then I think that teachers in general are pretty open to meeting with students after privately for discussion, and I think that they are generally happy to give advice about things. And so you can kind of generally ask advice or practice related questions, and then see what implementing that is like, in your experience. Because as we've said, it's not whether or not a person is a qualified, one aspect is whether or not a person is a qualified teacher. The other aspect is that qualified teacher a suitable guru for me? They might be a suitable guru for this other person, but are they a suitable guru for me? And that's a totally separate question. Then are they? So, I mean, there's two important questions. One, you have to check, do they seem to have the qualities of a teacher? And then, do they, is their way of explaining, their way of relating, is that beneficial for my mind? Is that something that, because some teachers are kind of more sharp or direct, other teachers are, more kind of supportive, and so they just have different styles. So you want to kind of get a sense of what kinds of advice, and then so when you get some practice advice and then you try to put it into practice, then you also want to go back and like relate your experiences, and then try to see, okay, well, how did they, how did they respond to when I went back and I said this? Did it, how does that unfold? So, there's a difference between like being a student of someone and being like a disciple of someone. Like, you can kind of attend classes with someone and think of them as a learned scholar, and as a reliable source of information. And then they would be happy to engage with you on that level, and kind of see how that unfolds, before going deeper and then actually choosing to become an actual disciple of that person. And then that's a more intimate way of relating.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any questions? Or
about vows and vows to take. Is it better to take the vow and break the vow, or I've heard just the opposite? Don't take any vows. I've heard both sides and all the way down the middle on this particular question.
So there's a question from the Gompa about vows and how prepared we feel like we need to be before taking vows. How, whether we might break the vow, how concerned, we should be about that. Um, and so, I mean, I would say that with all of the vows, there are methods for restoring and repairing them when they are. So sometimes that method does involve having to retake. If it's a really serious transgression of a vow, then they would, in some instances, they would say that you don't hold that vow anymore. Like if you take the lay vows and then you murder someone, uh, you can't just confess that. You can't just do like Vajrasattva with that. If it's a human that you've gone out and killed, then that vow is no longer part of your mental continuum. But you can go to your teacher, the person that you took that vow from, and say, can I retake that vow? And then they might, say, well, what were the circumstances of that? Like, were you in the army, or did they break into your house? Or, because there might be a concern that you need to do some work on yourself before they will let you take it again. Or it's really up to that person. Because they might, they wouldn't want to give it to you if you are just going to go break it again, like immediately thereafter. But of course, that's totally different than killing a mosquito, or even shooting a deer. Like I don't shoot deer, but it is different. You destroy the vow of killing from the root when you intentionally take the life of a human. So, but still, there is a method. You can retake that vow with a teacher. So there is still a method provided for that. So I would, and also, historically, they'll talk about specific examples of people who did have professions, because, if you do kill an animal, you are still breaking the vow. You're not destroying the vow from the root, but it isn't permissible. It isn't like there is an exception in the vow not to kill for non-human sentient beings. There is no exception. But there are like historical examples of butchers and things, and by butcher it doesn't mean like a person behind a meat counter who's like parceling out. It means the person who's killing, because like back then it was like the same person, but now we use butcher in we can use it in a different way. So that person had like a job, a 9 to 5 job, where they were breaking their vow. So they took the vow and they talked to their teacher about like taking it to where in their mind when they took it, it would be for when they were not at work. And of course, it's better to try to find a different line of work, like as quickly as you can. That's ideal. You want to try to exit that situation. But if you know that, that your job requires you to break a vow, then in your mind, when you take it, you think, okay, I won't do this when I'm not required to do it for work. So, there are examples like that. So, and then of course they say that the different levels of vows become more and more subtle as you move from the lay vows to the ordained vows, the bodhisattva vows, the tantric vows, the one day Mahayana. You have all of these different levels of vows, And as you progress to the tantric vows, they become, increasingly more subtle, and therefore much easier to break, in a technical sense. Um, whereas the 5 lay vows, like those are meant to be, relatively straightforward and, don't kill, don't lie, don't commit sexual misconduct, don't take intoxicants. Um, those are, kind of black and white. They're pretty, there's not a lot of wiggle room or, a gray area, or it's not like a mental karma necessarily. But the Vajrayana vows, when a person takes, they say that those are pretty subtle. And so generally speaking, what they say is that what's most important with all of the levels of vows is that we have a real, genuine respect for the ideal that the vows are giving us, for like seeing them as a training precepts, and having a real, genuine respect for the direction that they're trying to move us in, and seeing them as a critically important vehicle for moving the mind in that direction, which means that when we break a vow, we purify it. We don't just think, oh, well, doesn't matter, and just keep breaking it, because that's kind of like that carelessness that we've talked about, like with in relation to the topic, the guru devotion. That would kind of be like having that kind of carelessness with our teacher. That would be a sort of carelessness with the vows, where we've just decided, yeah, I told a lie yesterday. Yeah, I'll probably lie to this person next week. It's fine. I'm just gonna, it's not a big deal. So I would say, as long as we really have that genuine respect, and we have some confidence, that we can uphold the vows to the best of our ability, and that we're really going to make an effort, then we just rely on the methods that we have for restoring them. And then, because like with the Guru Puja, you restore Bodhisattva vows and Tantric vows. And, so I would say that generally I think they would say that to decide that we have to be a pure practitioner before we engage in the training that the vows are meant to give us would kind of mean that we didn't need to use those vows, that they didn't serve any purpose. Their purpose is to move an ordinary mind in that direction by giving us a training ground to interact with. And if we're beyond training, then there's no point in the vows. They serve no purpose. If we naturally uphold all of them faultlessly every moment of every day, then why take them? Why they don't? We might as well just not take them. So we want to become like that by having taken them, and then taking them seriously and purifying the mistakes that we make. Kodo, you had a question?
No.
Okay, you're unmuted.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh my God.
Okay. Okay.
My mind keeps going to specifics. Like, here in Santa Fe, it's relatively easy not to kill bugs and things like that. We don't have any. But if you live in New Orleans, for instance, and you have a 2-year-old, and you have a backyard with a playground in it, sort of thing, and you invite kids over, the red ants, a nest of red ants can kill a 2-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you can put all the honey down and all that kind of stuff and try to do the best you can. But I'm going to kill those ants. So, I've just been taken out of a whole lay valves even.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know how you can put that together.
Mm-hmm. So the question from the Gompa is in relation to vows that there are times with animals that that animals can present a danger, and to our children or to our own life or whatnot, and we may need to take steps to protect that life, and that may involve killing. Um, so again, in a way, that's why it's it's not good to kill non-human sentient beings, but it doesn't destroy that particular vow. Um, it's only if we go and kill a person do we actually destroy that vow. So we do, as you're saying, we do have to be practical, and we do have to live in the real world. And I mean, even when we did the module on karma, the teacher gave the example of um, termites, that were infesting the teacher's house on the land of Chenrezig monastery, and how they were going to just eat through the house, and the house would fall down if they didn't do anything. It would become structurally unsound, um, and and so the only, of course, you want to try to use, I mean, there is wood that like repels, and maybe they didn't use that kind of wood, and which maybe that would have been better, to use the right kind of building materials. And you want to do everything that you can to set things up in the best possible way, so you're not in that situation. You want to hide the food, and keep things clean, and use the right kinds of materials, and try to relocate nests of, or call somebody who might be able to relocate a nest of hornets or something, instead of just burning it. Maybe call society for that cares about that, and then they'll try to do that for you. So you want to do your best to avoid being put in that situation, but you might find yourself in that. You might just be how it is that you find yourself in that situation. So then, you go ahead and do it, but you try as strongly as you can to be regretful that you're forced into that situation. You don't try to, take any delight in it. You try not to think of it as, you know, this sort of like enemy, and I'm destroying this. You it's because it's the mind that you're working with. So, and then so you would try to be reciting mantra, you try to be playing mantra, maybe going up, like, okay, I have to do this tomorrow, but I'm going to play mantra for the next day, on a so that they can get some imprints of mantra in their mind. And then I'm going to do Vajrasattva afterward for, a week or 2 weeks or a month, every day, remembering that I was kind of forced into that situation. Maybe do medicine Buddha puja, and do that puja and dedicate the merits of the medicine Buddha puja for their rebirth. So you want to try to engage in actions that can benefit them, since you have to separate their minds from their bodies. You want to try to engage in virtuous actions. And then, so the main thing is to not, even though it's necessary, you don't allow the fact that it's necessary to make it be acceptable, or to make it be not a negative action. It can still be a negative action, and there might not be an alternative that is open to you, because you still want to hold the ideal in your mind of I will not kill. You don't want to just normalize that by thinking, well, it's okay because I couldn't get out of it. Yeah, so as you're saying, we have to be practical, and we can't expose our loved ones to dangerous situations because we have a vow. And I mean, even they would say it's even, if you could try to get someone who doesn't hold that vow to actually do the killing, that's better too. I mean, in one way, you know, because they haven't taken the vow, they're not breaking a vow. It's killing is a naturally negative action, which means that it's always negative for all people. But when you've taken a vow not to kill, then it becomes more intensely negative to break it subsequent to that. Whereas if there's a person who hasn't taken that vow, then it's still a negative action for them, but it's not as negative of an action. I mean, they're not off the hook, but, and well, I mean, if you, so that's another way of, if you decide that you are willing to take responsibility for what has to be done, then that is another way. You could think of it in that way too. Like, I don't want. So I mean, so there's two ways of thinking about it. One way is, well, like an exterminator, like that's their job. They're gonna be killing no matter what. Like that's what they've agreed to do with their lives. And if they're not gonna do it for me, they're gonna do it for somebody else. And so there's nothing I can really do about that. That's what they've decided to do. So maybe just calling them and letting them deal with it, because if it's not your house, they're going to be doing it for someone else. So their negative karma, you know. But another way of thinking about it is, I don't want anyone else to take that karmic hit, and so I'm willing to accept that negative karma on myself in order to prevent any negative karma from being accumulated by anyone else. So,
I think that would make it better for me to accept
mhm,
the bad karma of
mhm,
killing something than having my husband go to the bathroom and kill his father. I don't want him to have that.
mhm. Yeah, if you can really hold your mind, because it really depends on the extent of the negative karma really depends on the extent of the delusion that is arising in the mind at the time that the action is engaged in. So, um, if you really can hold your mind in that more virtuous state of, really accepting it and, really thinking about it in that way, then that certainly is beneficial. Um, yeah, but at the same, but it's just also to say that um, if a person that that the it's not black and white, because it all depends on the mind of the person who's doing it. So if we feel like, well, I have some training, I have some methods, so I'm the most well suited to do it, then that's great. Um, but it's just we need to hold the mind in that really virtuous state, um, intentionally in order for that benefit to accrue. Because if we are giving in to, if there's two people that are both giving into delusion or both giving into anger, aversion, what have you, and one of them is breaking a vow and the other one is not breaking a vow, then the person who's breaking a vow is accumulating a higher degree of negativity than the person who's not breaking a vow. So in that sense, so yeah, it really comes down to, can we do that because we're intentionally concentrating the mind in a virtuous state of wanting to protect anyone from accumulating that karma? That probably, if we can do that, then that's likely the better option. But again, still, we then have to purify. We still have to do all of the other things. We have to still regard it as something that needs to be purified, and we need to think about actually benefiting those sentient beings. We need to think about doing something useful rather than just taking their lives and moving on, and even just purifying, because purifying protects our own mind, but purifying doesn't do anything to benefit those sentient beings that we've now interrupted their karmic cycle of living out that lifetime. And because they were purifying their negative karma by persisting in that lower realm rebirth, and now we've cut that off and we've caused another rebirth to occur, and potentially we could have made things worse, for those sentient beings by doing that. So it's really important that we think about engaging in practices that are beneficial for those sentient beings, like reciting mantra, like doing medicine Buddha, um, those sorts of things, because we are making a decision that is having an impact, that is actually separating their body and mind, forcing a rebirth. It's not a meaningless, it's not a it is a real thing that we are actually doing that has actual implications. um, so that's a really critical part of it too. Okay, so we're just a little bit past time. So we will end here for today. So we'll end with dedicating. So we will recollect our altruistic motivation and think that by listening, by participating, we've actualized that motivation. Which has created positive energy in the mind. And we have a sense of letting that positive energy go. And thinking strongly, may it ripen for the benefit of all sentient beings without exception. Visualizing strongly that it creates vast benefit, providing conducive inner and outer conditions for practice for all sentient beings. That sentient beings are able to perfect their minds and achieve enlightenment. And that I myself also can achieve enlightenment in dependence upon this virtuous action, so that I gain the ability to continue to benefit sentient beings and be able to benefit them perfectly. So just cultivate a mind that offers the fruit of your practice in that way. Okay. Well, thanks for coming. And we will talk again on Thursday.